Welcome back to Justice Day 2021. Thank you for your participation in our Lunch and Learns. We're going to hop right into the second panel, which focuses on building community out of chaos. Our moderator is Paige Dukes of Southern Center for Human Rights. I'm just going to hand it over to Paige now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paige Dukes. I'm a communications associate at the Southern Center. And this morning you heard about where we've been, and at today's afternoon panel, we're going to be focusing on the current moment in 2021 and looking forward to beyond 2021. We've been discussing specific bills in the past, and now we'll be talking about which bills are currently in session and also learning about work by organizers on the ground to achieve criminal legal reform in Georgia. My colleague Caitlin Barnes will give a legislative recap and introduce you to some one-pagers and some other resources available on our website. My panelists joining me today are Caitlin Barnes from the Southern Center, Kosha Tucker with the Wren Collective, James Woodall, president of the Georgia State chapter of the NAACP, and Representative Greg Kennard of District 102. First, every year at Justice Day, usually in person, but this year virtually, we do a legislative update for you to learn more about what's happening at the Capitol and what bills the Justice Reform Partnership is watching. So now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Caitlin Barnes, to share what's on the table at the Capitol this year.
Thank you, Paige, and thanks to everyone who has made this event possible. We are more than halfway through this legislative session already, as the House and Senate have just wrapped up Legislative Day 23 of 40. While many of us aren't physically down at the Capitol, the legislature has still managed to keep us quite busy with dozens of bills that will impact the criminal legal system. I'm going to highlight just a few bills that the JRP is tracking, but you can find more information about all of these bills on our website, justicereformpartnership.org. So if you'll give me one moment, I'll share my screen. Here we go. Great. So let's start with the negative so that we can end with the positive. Unfortunately, lawmakers in both chambers are proposing some incredibly punitive legislation that would really be quite harmful if enacted. To start with, Senate Bill 10 and the new House Bill 534 are two different bills that would increase civil and criminal penalties for street racing activity. We oppose this legislation because we know that harsher penalties aren't likely to deter this conduct, but will disproportionately harm Black young people. Senate Bill 10 has passed the Senate Judiciary Committee and is now eligible for a vote by the full Senate. And House Bill 534, which has the backing of Governor Kemp, has been assigned to the House Public Safety Committee. Senate Bill 2, our next bill, would reduce accountability for schools when it comes to their discipline policies and practices, exacerbating the school to prison pipeline. This bill has already passed out of committee and is also now eligible for a vote by the full Senate. Senate Bill 171 would further criminalize people who engage in political demonstrations in Georgia and even penalize cities that don't do enough to block political demonstrations. This bill has been identified as a priority by the majority caucus in the Senate, and it has been assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee, but hasn't been heard yet by that committee. In the House, we've got House Bill 194, which would force more people convicted of certain offenses to serve the remainder of their lives under state supervision through lifetime probation sentences. That bill will actually be heard, it's actually probably being heard as we speak in the House Judiciary Non-Civil Committee, which you can watch archive video on the legislature's website. House Bill 286 has been mentioned a few times today as it is incredibly problematic. This bill would prohibit cities and counties from reducing their police force budgets by more than 5% in any 1 year or over a rolling 10-year period. This puts a strict limit on a city's ability to divert funding away from the police and to bolster services that are proven to make communities safer, like mental health services, affordable housing programs, education, just to name a few. House Bill 286 was passed by the House of Representatives just yesterday, unfortunately, and is now assigned to the Senate Government Oversight Committee. You can hear more about this bill and some of these others in one of the workshops that will follow this panel. Finally, House Bill 347 would force people considered lower risk on the sex offender registry to wait an additional 10 years before being able to even petition for relief, even when they have complied with all other requirements. House Bill 347, has passed out of committee and is now eligible for a vote in the full House. All of these harmful bills are on the move, so get in touch with your lawmakers to ask them to vote no on these bills, if you get the chance. Now for a few bills that we support. Senate bill, again, this is just a sneak peek. There are many, many other bills, good positive bills that we support, but we wanted to highlight a few that are really active right now. Senate Bill 105 improves the process for early termination of probation sentences. This bill actually was just passed by the Senate unanimously a little over an hour ago, which is really exciting. You can follow the Georgia Justice Project for alerts about SB 105. House Bill 272. This is a bill that's been around for a little while in different forms. It would raise the age of juvenile court jurisdiction to 17 to ensure that kids are treated like kids and not subject to prosecution and sentencing in adult court. This bill has actually passed out of committee, but might be a little bit stuck in Rules Committee, and so hasn't been scheduled for a vote by the full House yet. We're actually asking folks to give a call to members of the Rules Committee to ask them to schedule House Bill 272 for a vote. I think that someone's going to drop some information in the chat about this bill. And finally, House Bill 479 is the governor's bill to repeal citizens' arrest in Georgia. This bill is an important step towards ending state-sanctioned racial violence in Georgia. The bill has been assigned to the House Judiciary Committee, and we expect it will be scheduled for a hearing early next week. For action alerts on House Bill 479, you can follow the Southern Center for Human Rights. And again, I think that there will be info in the chat for how to get information from those groups. For more information about all of these bills that we support and oppose, and for regular updates about those bills, please be sure to check out our website, justicereformpartnership.org. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Those bills are so hopeful. 105 is very near and dear to me because I petitioned the court to have my probation terminated last year and was able to vote for the first time in my life, but I had to get a lawyer and go to court to do all of that. It sounds like people in my position will be able to terminate their probation early without having to hire a lawyer and go to court. So that's very hopeful. And also we will have a breakout session with my boss, Hannah Riley, our communications director, telling you how you can use social media to take action on some of these bills. But first, I'm going to head to James, and I'm going to ask you the first question, Reverend James Woodall, Georgia NAACP president. You work on a host of issues with the NAACP, but the Georgia NAACP has prioritized criminal legal reform. And as co-convener of the Just Georgia Coalition, your work has a fine focus on state-sanctioned violence. Can you share about Just Georgia's work to end state violence and support organizing infrastructure across Georgia and what you all are working on this coming year?
There you go.
You're muted, James.
Oh, sorry about that, technology. But thank you, Paige, for that question, and to my fellow co-panelists and those who are out in the audience. Good afternoon. You know, when we look at state-sanctioned violence, we're talking about systematic approaches to dehumanization. And so we look through the Georgia Code and really try to understand how we've come to be in this particular moment. So from Ahmaud Arbery and his murder, which we just celebrated, or really just observed rather, the 1-year anniversary of his passing, to the Rayshard Brooks murder and the host of other folks who, you know, before and after Rayshard Brooks in the city of Atlanta, but then you go to Cuthbert, Georgia, and Randolph County, talking about Kobe Edwards, who was killed by the police chief there, and so many others, Alexia Christian and Nasir Muhammad and just so many others. And what we're trying to really understand is, how does this continue to happen? We march year after year after year. We talk about, policy after policy in which we're trying to create a more safer Georgia. And so in the convening of the Just Georgia Coalition, we're not only looking at direct action, but we're also looking at the legislative priorities of stand your ground and use of force. We're looking at citizens arrest. We're looking at prosecutorial accountability. But then we move beyond just the legislative priorities and the advocacy that goes into that process. We're talking infrastructure development, right? How do you invest in organizing and movement building so that people all throughout this state they are equipped with the kind of resources, the tools, and the skills to be able to correctly, effectively, efficiently, but most of all, boldly declare what is right, what is just in their communities. One of the guiding principles of our work is this: Georgians know exactly what they want. They know exactly what kind of community that they want to live in and how to get that to that point. What our job is to do is to amplify those voices, to equip those voices and those leaders and those organizers with the kind of resources that they have declared that they need to be successful. And I believe that we have made some great, tremendous progress in the last year, but we shall not stop there. We should not rest, because there's still so much more work to be done.
Thank you so much. My next question is for Kosha Tucker, the Wren Collective. We've just heard a bit about the bills moving through Georgia's legislature right now and the work being done by coalition, such as the Just Georgia Coalition. In your work at the Wren Collective, what are some national trends that you see moving in criminal legal reform? And in your opinion, how does Georgia align with best practices nationwide?
Thanks for that question. It's a good one. And unfortunately, much of the reforms I'm going to talk about, Georgia has some catching up to do. So some of the national trends that we're seeing that really started in 2020, I'm going to highlight 4 statewide or trends that are happening across states in this country, and then a couple of local level citywide trends I'm seeing in states around the country. First is the continued drug reforms that we're seeing across the country. So we have states that are finally catching up to decriminalizing marijuana, like Virginia. We have states that are moving beyond decrim and fully legalizing the use of recreational marijuana, like Arizona and New Jersey, Montana, and South Dakota. And then we do have states that are finally catching up to, at minimum, legalize medical marijuana, like Mississippi. And but we have Oregon, if folks are familiar, that went beyond marijuana and actually decriminalized a whole host of drugs like heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. And so clearly Georgia's behind the ball here in terms of moving forward to at least decriminalize, if not legalize, recreational use of marijuana. We're also seeing sentencing reforms across the country. And I want to highlight specifically those sentencing reforms that are sentence review reforms, like Second Look legislation. We saw Washington, D.C. pass the Second Look Act last year, and that would allow people who were under the age of 25 at the time of their offense to have their sentences modified if they served at least 15 years in prison. I know of several lawmakers in states across the country that have drafted this similar legislation and are planning to introduce it this session in their states. And these bills even go further than DC. They don't have age restrictions and they don't have offense restrictions. We're talking about states that are considering giving people an opportunity to get back in court, to get back before a judge and have their sentences reduced, regardless of how old they were when they committed the offense. And we also have states that are looking at folks who are aging out, or not aging out, but aging and elderly in prison, who really pose no threat to public safety anymore, who will have an easier opportunity to get before a court and have their sentences reduced. This is something that I think Georgia could really get on board with, because here, courts are currently limited in their ability to fix or modify a sentence unless that sentence is illegal or unconstitutional. They're very limited on their ability to fix or void a valid sentence. So if we gave people an opportunity to petition the court to have their sentences modified, a valid sentence modified, we could get people out of prison who no longer pose a risk of public safety. We're also seeing states attack collateral consequences of criminal convictions. So there are states that are going after disenfranchisement, as well as drug-related bans on government benefits. I know Georgia is making great strides in this area in terms of allowing people with felony convictions greater opportunities to register to vote and be eligible to vote. But we're seeing across the country places that are allowing people who are still serving felony sentences to register to vote. So for example, in DC, the Restore the Vote amendment was passed last year that allows people who are currently incarcerated on felony convictions to be able to register to vote. California with Proposition 17 now allows people who are on parole an opportunity to vote. So these are people who are still under active sentences who are getting an opportunity to vote. And then finally, I want to talk about the juvenile justice reforms that we're seeing, because I know that Georgia is still fighting this battle. We are seeing states raise the age of juvenile court jurisdiction. We saw Vermont sort of do a staggered raising the age legislative agenda where it was raised to 18, and then by next year, the jurisdiction will raise to 19, and then by 2024, the jurisdiction will go up to 24. Massachusetts is considering raising its age of juvenile court jurisdiction to 21. And New York raised it to 18, I think in 2019. And Michigan just this past year raised their age of juvenile court jurisdiction to 18. So we're seeing good trends in that direction. And I want to talk about some local things we're seeing too with juvenile court treatment, or treatment of young adults even, where we're seeing district attorneys and criminal court systems treat young people who are aged 18 to 25 differently, given what we know about brain development and the lack of brain maturity, but the existence of brain plasticity, allowing kids or young adults who are up until they're 25, the ability to change positively, even when they've done really dumb things as young people. And I want to wrap up talking about another sort of local level trend that we're seeing across the country, and that is cities implementing alternative first responder programs. And this is where Atlanta actually is among these local level efforts to send non-law enforcement first responders to crises where people are who may be having behavioral health and mental health challenges, or even substance use crises, where a police response is not appropriate and potentially very lethal. These cities are sending medics, mental health professionals, social workers to try to de-escalate these conflicts that don't need a criminal response. So that's actually, so I'll end there positively because Atlanta is making great strides there, but it would be awesome to see that across the state at other local levels.
Thank you so much, Kosha, for all of that national context. I do have a follow-up question for you, but first I want to go back to James. James, I know you've got some important business at the Capitol, so I just wanted to give you a chance to give us your final thoughts before you have to run. You're muted again.
I'll just say this at closing. You know, when we think about a just Georgia and we think about criminal justice, it's important for us to look at the source of where these things are coming from. It didn't just come overnight. We have to be very intentional about fighting against any attempt, whether it's a Democratic-led attempt, Republican-led attempt, or a partisan-led attempt to disenfranchise our communities. We know all too well how our communities are impacted by these kinds of pushes. And so we got to be very vigilant, persistent, but most of all, we have to be consistent with our pursuit of justice and justice truly for all people. So I'll say that in closing. Thank you all so much for having me. Sorry I have to leave, but we have a very important appointment at 1 o'clock. So y'all take care.
Thank you so much for joining us and for everything you're doing. Yes, it is true. Georgia has a long way to go still with felony disenfranchisement, as I was saying. And there are, you know, we stay in this and we look forward to the future, which is what this panel is all about. And I wanted to ask you, Kosha, how your experiences as a public defender and at the ACLU in Georgia inform your perspective on the landscape?
Yeah, I think that I feel hopeful that Georgia can implement a lot of the reforms that I'm seeing across the country. I worked in the Metro Atlanta area, so I was in DeKalb County, so my perception could be skewed or too local. But I think that given the trajectory that it appears our state is on, we're in a good position, but we will need to be careful to sort of stave off the backlash that is also happening nationally with folks who are threatened by some of the reforms that we're seeing across the country. I think Georgia has to be careful to be mindful of that. But when I was a public defender, I represented kids in juvenile court and adults, and so many of if we could attack the young adult population and then look at the back end where we can get people out of prison when they no longer pose a threat to public safety, I think that would have an immense impact on mass incarceration in our state. We could pull the data statewide, but I'm willing to guess that we're seeing a lot of offenses happen during that underdeveloped brain time for young people. And then we also know that people age out of criminal behaviors. And so if we could attack on the back end, we're looking at the two sort of key populations of people who can be helped and intervened early so that they don't go into the system, or we can give people an opportunity on the back end to show that they've changed and truly aged out of criminal behaviors, which we expect them to do. That's what the social science says. And that's the way that we can keep our community safe without relying on this criminal legal system to not do that. And it's proven time and time again that it doesn't do that.
Thank you, Kosha. That definitely resonates with me as a person who was that dumb kid who did that dumb thing before my brain had fully developed. And I definitely don't consider myself a threat to public safety today, but I certainly had to serve a mandatory minimum sentence as a result of my actions when I was a kid. And also very aware of that backlash that you mentioned yesterday at the Capitol during the hearing of HB 286. I think we saw that very backlash. And I'm going to turn now to Representative Kennard. I appreciated your remarks yesterday. You said that 286 would handcuff us to the law enforcement option. And I appreciated your remarks there. And I would like to hear what you think that community should be particularly aware of this session, and also how can your constituents better interface with elected officials in this virtual environment?
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Paige, and good to see everyone on the panel. Of course, we're all working in the mix of things, some advocating, some in the judiciary space, and then I'm in the legislative space. I came here via my professional work as a nonprofit CEO working with homelessness. So I see these issues up close and personal every day. A typical client for us has a mental health diagnosis, a subsequent addiction, has low academic achievement, and is justice involved. So I see the barriers for the folks who are returning from incarceration, getting back in the mainstream. And I also see the pipeline of what causes someone to become justice involved anyway. And so I'm working on the front end and the back end with legislation. On the front end, I'm working on universal pre-K and mandatory kindergarten. Kindergarten is not mandatory in Georgia. And we have a lot of people who would like to get into pre-K that can't because there's not capacity. So the bill I've written is called HB 262, and it mandates pre-K and kindergarten. So I'm sure most of you are aware that third grade reading level is an accurate predictor of someone's future. Someone who's not reading on third grade level is more likely to be poor, experience teen pregnancy, drop out of school, and become justice involved. So if we can get our and right now 2/3 of Georgia third graders are not reading on level, which is a crisis. So trying to work on the front end so that we don't need as many prisons on the back end. So my bill would call for a reduction from the Department of Corrections budget over a 5-year period that would put it on the front end into pre-K. and it would totally pay for it. So those are some things I'm working on in terms of, all the major committees, the judiciary, non-civil, public safety. That's where you got to put some time in and learn those names. And virtually, I mean, everybody's got an email. All the committee meetings are available by Zoom. So there are ways for you to connect with those stakeholders and those very influential people in those committees. So I would just say, keep your foot on the gas, and we'll do what we can. Of course, my party is playing defense a lot. It's hard for us to get momentum on any of our bills. I don't think we've gotten one passed yet. And that's typical. So what we're doing is playing defense on the really horrible bills like HB 286 and the others that you mentioned earlier. So at least we can maybe make bad bills less bad. And that's kind of our posture right now. But, elections matter, and we got 2022 coming up, and I'm optimistic that we can make some gain some ground in the House, the Senate, and in the governor's office.
Thank you, Representative. We are running low on time, but I just want to offer my panelists, Caitlin, Kosha, Representative Kennard, if you have any final thoughts on how to make change and think about criminal legal reform here in Georgia.
We've got these election bills that it's just the old playbook of voter suppression. So that's something we've got to make a lot of noise about right now, and make sure we're calling them out on what these bills actually are. And it's trying to stop the voices of people of color, minorities. And so, we've made such huge gains in November, and they're trying to roll back all of that ground that was made in that election. So we just got to really make a lot of noise right now about the election, because elections matter. This is where the game is. It's elected office. All of these systems are propped up by political power. And so we have to stay in that realm of political power. I'm a pastor. I'm a pastor and nonprofit guy, but once I understood that all these things are not only behavioral but structural, this is systemic stuff. That's why I was compelled. Running for office wasn't even on my radar, but knowing that all these things, from criminal justice reforms to incarceration rates, it's not. Some say the system is broken, needs to be fixed. I say the system is working perfectly as it was designed to work. So we got to change things on a structural level, and that's why I got involved to begin with.
Thank you. I agree. Political power is so important, and we need everybody to have that. One person, one vote. I appreciate the work that you're doing at the Capitol. Kosha, Caitlin, do you have anything that you want to leave our participants with, thinking about how to make change in Georgia?
I would just say to do what the Justice Reform Partnership and Southern Center tells us to do, and also to stay engaged so that you can keep the faith and the energy to do this work. I think that we're always fighting, and we're always on the defensive, it seems. And I'm a daughter, I'm from the South. I was born and raised in North Carolina. It's never been easy to sort of live freely in this world. And so we just have to find ways to keep the faith and sustain ourselves.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much to all my panelists.